On June 7th, 2021, Alec Murdaugh made a 911 call from his property in the Low Country of South Carolina. He was calling from the scene of a double murder. The victims, his wife Maggie and his son Paul.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you said it's your wife and your son?
My wife and my son.
Police responded to the call and encountered a bloody scene with 2 lifeless bodies, shell casings on the ground, and Alec Murdaugh. The officer was wearing a body camera, and his exchange with Alec was recorded.
His immediate reaction was to start telling me about an incident that had happened with his son with a boating accident.
With the boating accident?
Yes, sir.
Had you asked him anything about that?
I did not.
My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. He's been getting threats. Most of it's been benign stuff we didn't take serious. You know, he's been getting punched.
Tonight, we take a listen to the entire encounter, the first big piece of evidence presented to the jury in Alec Murdaugh's double murder trial, as prosecutors try to prove that the man who called 911 is the same man who shot and killed Maggie and Paul. We are live from the Low Country with all the big moments from the Murdaugh family murder trial. I'm Vinny Politan. Great to have you with us tonight. Big day of testimony inside the courtroom, but I want to start by going back in time a little bit. There was a trial I covered right around the turn of the century. The defendant was a man named Rabbi Fred Newlander. He was accused of hiring a hitman to bludgeon his wife to death inside their home. He's the one who made the 911 call, Rabbi Fred Newlander. He was the one who found the body. And when those first responders came, they testified about what they saw and what they noticed. And one thing they noticed was there wasn't a drop of blood on the rabbi. His suit was pristine. His wife there was blood all over the living room. She was bludgeoned to death on the ground. And that was used against him by prosecutors. The jury didn't like it. Like, this is your wife of 30 years? You raised 3 children together? And when you come home and she's lying in a pool of blood on the floor, you don't even touch her? You don't try to revive her? You don't shake her? Nothing, you're pristine. You didn't go near her. Jury didn't like that. Let's talk about Alec Murdaugh. He wasn't bloody either. And today we heard testimony about, what did he look like? How was he acting? Well, let's start with, this is a horrific scene, and it was described by his own attorney, a butchering of his wife and his son. His wife and son. Covered with blood, shot and killed, his face blown off, brains splattered. I mean, it's graphic stuff. We've heard the descriptions in the courtroom. Yet, he's not bloody. Now, on the one hand, it's all right. Well, if he's the killer, there'd be this back spatter of blood on him. So prosecutors, if they saw they did have blood, they'd say he did it. But he's not bloody. But what does that mean? Is the jury going to like that? Is he attempting CPR? Is he trying? Is he touching them? What's going on here in this response? Right? Because his version of what happened is that he left, he came back, and he found them there. So if you find him there lying down, do you touch him? Do you get blood on yourself? I don't know. I don't know. Was a bad fact for the rabbi. We'll see what the jury thinks about this. There was something else about the response of Alec Murdaugh. As soon as he gets there, he's talking about his son, who's one of the victims here, about his boat crash. And he's already instantaneously talking about the motive for the murder. Wait, you just found your son and your wife dead, and already you're diving into a motive that someone else would have. Could be a natural reaction, I guess. Prosecutors don't think it is. They don't think it is. They think this is a guy who knows he's got to set up his defense out of the box. And there's another part of this conversation. And again, this is the responding officers talking to Alec Murdaugh, and he's talking about tire tracks. So we're talking about somebody else's motive and evidence that someone else did it. Look, over here, tire tracks. Those aren't my tracks, somebody else's tracks. So is that natural? Is that the way you should react at the scene of finding your wife and son dead? I don't know. I hope none of you ever have to experience that. But he'll be judged on it. He'll absolutely be judged on it. And both sides will make their arguments about why it leads to the conclusions of either guilt or being not guilty in this case. But it's significant because it's not intuitive. Intuitively, you'd think he'd have blood on him, he'd be trying to help him, revive him, and he'd be completely distraught by the loss of his son and the loss of his wife, rather than trying to solve the crime on the scene immediately. But he's a lawyer. I don't know. Maybe he just thinks that way. Maybe that's the way I would respond. But again, hopefully, none of us will ever be in that position. So, there's body cam footage from the responding officer, the first person to respond to the scene, to be there with Alec Murdaugh. Now, the video has not been released yet. It's been sealed, but the audio was played in court, so I want all of you to hear it right now.
To let you know, because of the scene, I did go get a gun and bring it down here.
It's in your vehicle? Do you have any guns on you at all?
No, sir. It's leaning up against the side of my car.
Okay. You're fine, man. You're fine. Turn around for me.
I don't have any.
Okay. Yes, sir. I see that. Okay. This is your wife and son? Okay.
It's bad. Check the pulses.
Yes, sir. This is the firearm you brought from inside the house?
Sir, yes, sir. I went and this is a long story. My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. He's been getting threats. Most of it's been benign stuff we didn't take serious.
Okay.
You know, he's been getting like punched. I know that's what it is.
Did you get home right when you called, or did you go to the house first? Where is the house?
I came to the house first. My mom has late stages Alzheimer's, and my dad is in the hospital. Okay. I left. I don't know what time. I can go back on my phone and tell you the exact times. Did you check?
Okay. Did I check what?
Did you check them?
We got medical guys that are. That's what they're gonna do. Okay.
What are they doing? Can they hurry?
They are. Yes, sir. That gentleman that was out here already, he's one of the battalion chiefs. Okay. How did you pull up? You from back there?
I went to the house and they weren't home, which was odd. I tried to call.
Okay.
And then I knew they had been down here before I left to go to my mom's.
Okay.
And so that is loaded.
Okay.
You might want to unload it. But
Is this the only firearm with you? This is the only one, or is there any more in the truck?
I believe that's it.
You think that's the only one? Okay.
I'm 99%.
Do you normally have any other firearms in your vehicle?
I don't, but occasionally there's a pistol in there. They are dead, aren't they?
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
Randy. Where are you now? All right. Yeah, the police are here now. The police are here now.
Affirmative.
That's my brother.
Okay. When was the last time you were here with them? Or talked to them or anything like that?
It was earlier tonight. I don't know the exact time, but
Okay.
I left. I was probably gone an hour and a half from my mom's, and I saw them about 45 minutes before that.
Okay.
I rode around with Paul for 2 hours this afternoon in the pickup truck.
That's your son, Paul? Okay.
Somebody going to check him?
Yes, sir. They've already checked them.
They did check him?
Yes, sir.
It's official that they're dead?
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
I'm very sorry. Gotta call her here.
What's her name?
Her name's Maggie Murdaugh. Margaret Brandstetter Murdaugh. How you doing?
What's her birthday? I see quite a few tire tracks in here. Were any of these you going in and out?
No, I came in here and I left one time and I came back.
Okay.
The rest of them, maybe
Okay.
from earlier, but
Okay.
only 2 are mine.
Did you go out this way at all?
No.
He's being judged, and he'll be judged on what he was saying, how he looked, how he responded, how he acted at the scene in this body cam video. Again, the video's been sealed, but we did have the audio. We should have that video for you perhaps tomorrow. We'll see. Right now, though, let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Chanley Painter, joining us live from outside the courthouse down in Walterboro, South Carolina. Chanley, great to see you tonight. Give us a little more context, a little more perspective and importance of this body cam footage.
Well, it was the start of the prosecution's case in chief. They took the jury there, and as you said, we couldn't see it, this body cam video under seal. So before the graphic images of Paul and Maggie's body were shown on the screen, the defense table right there, actually see that white box lid? They put that in front of the screen so that it would prevent not only the public in the gallery, but Alec Murdaugh himself from seeing the body cam video and really all the evidence that was introduced today. But this body cam video came in under the first witness of the day, Sergeant Green of the Colleton County Sheriff's Office. He was the very first person to respond to the Murdaugh property December 7th, 2021. And he says that he arrives, he could see Alec Murdaugh standing there, a shotgun leaning up against his truck. He could see the bodies also. He described Alec Murdaugh as upset, but he couldn't see any tears. He never really approached the bodies while he was on the scene. And you couldn't see any blood on him, which I believe you also mentioned earlier in the show. But what stood out to Sergeant Green on the witness stand is what Alec Murdaugh brought up immediately, and that was the boat crash, and that Paul, his son, had been receiving some threats. He knew that's what it was. Well, of cross-examination, the defense attorney Dick Harpootlian tried to question further Sergeant Green about why Murdaugh would want to bring that up. Let's watch.
Did you find it unreasonable for him to say that his son, who'd been involved in this incident, who'd been threatened on numerous occasions, been punched, he told you he'd been punched, right?
He did.
Okay. That was a possible explanation, not implausible, for somebody killing Paul. You didn't bite back on him, did you?
No.
And it was, in his mind, apparently the only reasonable explanation that occurred, right?
I don't know what was in his mind.
Well, I mean, that's what he told you. That's what he believed.
That was the statement that he made, yes.
Later on, another first responder witness on the scene said he thought that was a reasonable thing, but it was a big issue for the prosecution to highlight. On cross-examination, though, Dick Harpootlian's theme on a lot of the crosses, Vinny, for these officers was how they possibly contaminated the scene. They were walking around without flashlights in the dark, that they were approaching bodies when they knew that the bodies were deceased. They didn't have proper crime scene gear on to cover their boots and their shoes, and that they were entering parts of the shed they didn't have to do. And that seemed to be quite effective as far as keeping the attention of the jurors throughout the day.
He's done it many, many times, and we've seen that many, many times from defense attorneys, and it's legitimate, right? Sloppy police work, contaminated crime scene, all of that. Let's talk more about Alec Murdaugh. He also made the 911 call, and the jury got to hear that today.
They did. In fact, they heard. So when he placed the 911 call, they first heard from the 911 dispatcher in Hampton County. His call went to Hampton County. Again, this Moselle property on the border of Hampton and Colleton County, but on the side of Colleton County. That's why we're here. But this call went to Hampton. So what we've heard when it was released in 2021 was the Hampton County portion of the 911 call before it was transferred over to Colleton County. So we heard an extended version today with a second witness on the stand that offered a lot more details about what Alec Murdaugh was saying to the 911 dispatcher there while he waited for police. And we learned that he actually is on the phone with 911. He drives back to his home. He's telling them he's going to go get a shotgun. They're asking him questions about, did he hear any noises? And he said, no, I wasn't there. But he does describe what he did see. Let's watch.
Okay, where is he shot at? Ma'am, I don't know, but he's got blood everywhere. I can see his brain.
He has the frantic voice, of course, and it was in kind of at times inaudible or some kind of garbled in the courtroom because the audio would stop and pick back up, and they explained that a little bit. But some other key points, he says that he hadn't seen his wife and son for around 2 hours before calling 911, that nothing looked out of place. He said that, again, his son Paul had been threatened for months, and that he knew that those threats had been reported, that Paul had reported those threats, and that his son Paul knew who was threatening him on this call. But he was also told to turn on his hazard lights, to prepare for the police to arrive and get there. The operator kept saying, don't touch anything, don't move around, but he said that he had already approached the bodies and checked for a pulse, which also came up later in testimony about how reasonable that would have been given the state of Paul and Maggie's bodies. Vinny.
Chanley Painter, stand by. We've got more questions for you, but right now, based on everything that she's shown us, let's bring in Los Angeles, California, body language expert, forensic psychiatrist, trial expert, witness, columnist of Inside the Criminal Mind, Dr. Carol Lieberman with us. Dr. Lieberman, great to see you tonight, and I'm fascinated by what he's saying and how he's saying it, but I want to know what you're hearing from Alec Murdaugh, both in the body cam audio that we heard and the 911 call. What are you hearing in his voice? What is significant in how he's saying it and what he's saying to you?
Yes, well, as far as the 911 call, I don't think it sounds real. I don't think it sounds authentic. But as far as, how he looks in the courtroom when all of this testimony was being given, it's interesting. The prosecution was making a deal out of the fact that he wasn't at the crime scene. He wasn't crying. There were no tears, no real tears. And in the courtroom, he, wipes away tears. There are real tears. His face is red. So I think that he really was crying, but it wasn't for his son and his wife. I think it was for himself. He was feeling sorry for himself that is in this mess, and that there's, bringing on all this evidence.
What's your take on his lead, though, right? In journalism, there's always like the lead, right? What you start with is the most important. And prosecutors are making a big deal about the fact that he's leading with the boat crash, like right out of the box. The responders coming to the scene, his wife and his son on the ground, and he's talking about the boat crash being the motive. That's what this is all related to.
Yes. Even though I think he was he had been taking drugs for quite some time, so that was impairing his brain. But at the same time, I think he had planned out so cleverly so much of what was there. Starting with having the story about the boat crash and blaming it on that. And, that is sort of a plausible thing. You would think that, yes, if there's proof that he has been getting hit or, and getting threats and so on, then yes, that would seem like a plausible thing. But the fact that he brings it up right at the beginning, instead of being really honestly upset about his wife and his son, is something that he had planned before he allegedly did all of this to begin with. He was going to blame it on the boat accident.
It does, and I know that's where prosecutors are going with what they're saying. Anything else that you notice from his tone, the way he was reacting at the scene?
Well, yes, he was he had a high-pitched voice. It was just bad acting. It's like what he thought you're supposed to be like when you see your wife and your son dead, and not just dead, but such an incredibly violent scene, gruesome scene, their brains splattered all over. And so I think he was, thought to himself, well, how would a person act? How are they supposed to act, a husband and a father, if they saw this kind of thing? Also, in terms of body language in the court, he's at times he's rocking back and forth, and that's a self-soothing action. And also, he's like chewing sometimes, and I don't know if that's because he has gum in his mouth or he's chewing the sides of his mouth, but it's anxiety.
Dr. Carol Lieberman, great insight tonight. Thank you so much for helping us out.
Thank you.
All right, folks, when we come back, we're going to talk about the alibi. Does it line up with what Alec Murdaugh was telling the first responders? Plus, coming up next hour. On the docket tonight in St. Johns County, Florida, young teenager Tristan Bailey went missing. When she was found in her neighborhood, the medical examiner reported 114 stab wounds. Then, more shock when the suspect was arrested, her 14-year-old classmate and neighbor, Aiden Fucci. Tonight, a preview of his upcoming murder trial on Court TV. The life of Alec Murdaugh is bizarre. It is complicated.
This great South Carolina attorney is charged with the murders of his own wife and son.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Who exactly is this guy?
The evidence is going to show that he was there.
He is innocent.
Who knows where this thing is going to end?
This case needs to be resolved. We need to put this behind us and move on.
Murdaugh Family Murders. Live coverage weekday mornings only on Court TV.
3, 2, 1. He left the house at 9:06, returns at 10:01 after seeing his mother who has dementia. Now remember, that day, his father, who is dying, is taken to the hospital. Mom's home alone with the housekeeper. Perfectly reasonable for him to want to go see her. And later than usual, because his father's not there. He's in the hospital. He dies 2 days later. His father dies 2 days later. So the question is, if he leaves at 9:06 and he's back at 10:01, he literally, I mean, and he can account, the cars and the cell phone records account for where he was between 9:06 and 10:01.
Timeline and alibi, so significant in this case. And that's Alec Murdaugh's attorney, you know, kind of talking about this little window of time to try to squeeze that time. However, there's another part of all this. Let me put on the screen the notice of alibi. So this is Alec Murdaugh officially announcing the alibi. Murdaugh was on the Moselle property from sometime prior to 8:30 on June 7th until a few minutes after 9 p.m. when he left to visit his mother at 115 Almeda Place in Barnville, South Carolina. Maggie and Paul were alive the last time he saw them before leaving for Almeda. Murdaugh arrived at Almeda approximately 9:20. He visited with his mother, Libby, and a nurse's aide, Shelley. Murdaugh stayed with his mother until about 9:45, then returned to Moselle at approximately 10 p.m. So he's gone for, what, about an hour or so? Murdaugh discovered Maggie and Paul's bodies at approximately 10:05 p.m. Now, how does this jive with what he said to first responders that night, the night of the murders? Because he's recorded, he's on video. We heard the audio today. Let's take another listen.
When was the last time you were here with them or talked to them or anything like that?
It was earlier tonight. I don't know the exact time, but
Okay.
I left. I was probably gone an hour and a half from my mom's, and I saw them about 45 minutes before that.
Okay.
I rode around with Paul for 2 hours this afternoon in the pickup truck.
That's your son, Paul? Did you get home right when you called, or did you go to the house first? Where is the house?
I came to the house first. My mom has late stages Alzheimer's, and my dad is in the hospital.
Okay.
I left. I don't know what time. I can go back on my phone and tell you the exact times.
All right, does this jive with the alibi? What is it? How does it relate to what the state said? Let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Chanley Painter, live outside the courthouse in South Carolina. So Chanley, what did the state say about the alibi and the timeline here?
The prosecutor laid out a minute-by-minute timeline, Vinny, starting at 8:15. Everyone, Paul, Maggie, Alec, at the home, had dinner together. By 8:30, Paul's phone is moving towards the kennels from the home, and this is how they know that Alec was at the kennels with Maggie and Paul. Let's watch.
The evidence will show that he was there. He was at the murder scene with the two victims. And more than that, just over 3 minutes later, 8:49 and 1 second, Paul's phone locks forever. He never reads another text. He never sends another text. He doesn't answer calls.
And just about 30 seconds after that, they say Maggie's phone locks forever. And it wasn't until 9:02, all of a sudden, Vinny, Alec Murdaugh's phone starts its activity once again after it's been silent for about an hour. And that's unusual, according to prosecutors, because he's always on his phone. But at 9:02, guess who he calls? Maggie. Not once, but twice. And then tries to text her, he'll be right back, and doesn't drive out towards the kennels. He drives the other way to his mom's house.
So how did, from what he was saying that night about where he was, Alec Murdaugh, does that create any sort of a conflict with what their alibi is now and how they have put together their timeline? So the timeline of what he said to the responding officer versus the timeline that's been outlined by the defense in their alibi.
There's all kinds of inconsistencies, Vinny, from what he told first responders that he hadn't seen Paul or Maggie for an hour and a half or 2 hours, to what he said in his notice of alibi, to what he said to police. There's other statements the prosecution's going to bring in that he also has contradicted himself. So there's more to come with this alibi. Will we ever know?
Okay, it's so important in this case. All right, Chanley Painter, thank you. We're going to be speaking a little bit later on. Let's bring in our guest joining us in Charlotte, North Carolina, creator of the Murdaugh podcast, Impact of Influence, Matt Harris with us, and in Jacksonville, Alabama, professor of forensics at Jacksonville State University, former senior investigator for the Fulton County Medical Examiner's Office, and the host of the Body Bags podcast, Joseph Scott Morgan. Great to see you both. Matt, let me start with you. Listening to that body cam today and hearing what he's telling the responding officer, does it mess up his timeline? Does it mess up his alibi?
What he was saying to the first responders and to the law enforcement officers that showed up, I think you can give him a little leeway. I'm not trying to say he didn't do it, but if he says he was at his mom's for an hour and a half, okay, we'll take travel time and all that. Maybe it was an hour, which was close to an hour, according to all reports. So he's off by, 30 minutes. But I think Harpootlian is going to say, okay, you don't expect the guy to remember every single thing that happened. Yeah, his whole family was just blown away, or most of his family was blown away. I think that my opinion of his behavior and his way he acted in the courtroom is only going to lead to confirmation bias. In other words, if you think he did it, you're going to say, well, there it is. Look how he's doing it. Look, he didn't cry then. He did cry then. And if you think he's innocent, you're going to well, look, the guy's really hurting. I can't imagine it swaying somebody one way or another based on just demeanor alone.
Joseph Scott Morgan, a big part of this case is timeline, alibi, exactly when all of this happened, where he was, where he said he was. He said he's in that body cam audio, he says that he saw Maggie and Paul about 45 minutes before leaving. It seems like the prosecutor in his opening statement is trying to shrink that time based upon the rest of the evidence they have. How important do you think all of this is in trying to figure out if he does have a legitimate alibi or not?
I think it's very important, and I think that what's going to be most important here is to get a sense of when the coroner first did the examination on the remains, how soon the coroner was allowed to have access to the remains, and how thorough that examination was for something that we refer to as postmortem interval. Was that assessed thoroughly at the scene? And that takes into considerations consideration of things like ambient environmental temperature, and then of course temperatures of the bodies. And there are certain methodologies we employ there. Also, the level to which the bodies had been stiffening relative to rigor mortis. Now, there's other things that we look at as well. I think that that's going to be very important. And, you know, marrying that up with the time, these cell phones pinging off towers, movements and everything, I think it's going to be the totality of all of that data. But, you know, the devil's in the details. And if any of these things are missed along the way, it's going to open up the door for defense to attack. That's why it's very important, you know, from Jump Street, that you cover all of your bases, that you do the most thorough job as you possibly can upon arrival.
Absolutely. And the attack began today to that first responding officer. When we come back, we're going to talk about the crime scene, the tire tracks, the footprints. Did investigators contaminate this scene? Did they erase evidence of some other potential killer? We'll talk about it when we return.
I will kill you, I will end you, and I will destroy you.
Someone they knew is back.
I mean, you talk about high stakes, right?
With a brand new season.
This is how I'm going to die.
New crimes.
It was a brutal killing.
New cases.
You ask yourself, why?
Committed by those closest to the victim.
They seemed happy.
Someone They Knew with Tamron Hall. New season premieres February 19th.
Only on Court TV.
So there in the background behind where Mr. Murdaugh is standing, you can see several sets of tire tracks. The grass was really wet that night, so those tracks appeared to be really fresh. So it caught my eye.
All right. And why did it catch your eye?
It just seemed odd that it appeared to be that many sets of tire tracks since he said he pulled up, went to the house, and came back. It just appeared that there were more than just that.
It appeared that there were more tracks than just that.
That's correct.
So what do these tracks actually mean? It depends which side you're asking, by the way, because that was direct examination. So they're sort of saying, well, maybe he's driving back and forth a few more times than he says he was. But then Dick Harpootlian, I always mess up his name, he's got a tricky name, Alex Murdaugh's attorney, turns it all around and makes it something completely different. Watch this.
What did you do to preserve those?
The tire tracks, nothing.
And you certainly are not an expert in tire tracks.
I'm not.
So you couldn't tell what was multiple vehicles or one vehicle?
No.
And it may have been multiple vehicles?
May have been.
Did you take pictures of the tracks?
I did not take any pictures of the scene.
Instruct anyone to take pictures of the tracks?
No, sir, that's not my job.
When Sweat arrived, did you tell them about the tracks?
No, sir, not my job.
Do you regret not doing that?
It's not part of my job description.
So what's your job to even tell them there were multiple tire tracks?
If it had come up, if I had been asked, yes.
I'll be honest, that's not great for the prosecution, the way that played. And he may have done his job exactly the way he's supposed to, but it still doesn't play well inside that courtroom. Let's bring back in Matt Harris from the Murdaugh podcast, Impact of Influence, and Joseph Scott Morgan. All right, Matt, I'll start with you. As you're hearing this, does it sound like these investigators botched the scene from your perspective?
I got nothing. Which one?
I think Matt is not hearing me. He lost audio. That's okay. Stand by. Joseph Scott Morgan, you've been at many death scenes. What did this first responding officer mess up here?
I no longer have sound, but if you've thrown the question to me, I'll say in the affirmative that no, I don't believe that they did in fact botch the scene. What I believe is that, as that deputy had stated earlier, they had in fact secured the scene with crime scene tape. He even indicated that throughout his direct examination. He went into great detail about that, specifically to that point.
So I think we have audio issues with both our guests. which is unfortunate, but we will take a listen to some more testimony here. Sergeant Green again here being cross-examined, not about tire tracks this time, but about footprints at the scene. Take a listen.
Did somebody from Fire and Rescue point out footprints?
I believe on my body camera there is a fire rescue individual pointing out some footprints.
Okay. Did you take pictures of those?
I did not.
Did you tell SLED about them?
I did not.
So nobody attempted to determine whether those were Maggie's footprints, Paul's footprints, or at least that night there was no effort by you or your department to preserve those?
By me, no, I cannot speak for everyone else.
Chanley Painter is still with us. I believe you can hear me, right, Chanley?
I got you, Vinny.
Fantastic. Okay, so how does this go over in the courtroom? Because I know what Murdaugh's attorney is doing. He's making it look like these guys have no idea what they're doing. They're botching the scene. There are tire tracks and footprints that all of a sudden are disappearing. That could be the real killer. How did it play in the courtroom?
It was effective inside the courtroom, Vinny. I'm watching the jurors, and they are taking it in. Now, they don't have notepads, they aren't taking notes, but they're watching. And I noticed a couple jurors actually on cross-examination, and this was the continuous theme for every law enforcement officer by Dick Harpootlian to poke holes in their investigation, that they made some mistakes. And jurors kind of would give a slight nod, like they understood what was happening. You know, you and I know, and that's not their job to process and collect evidence and do that and whatnot, but jurors don't know the difference, and it was effective, especially when he consistently did it with each of the witnesses, and they would admit, no, I didn't do that, or no, that wasn't what I did.
All right, I think we've got Joseph Scott Morgan back in the conversation here. Joseph, let me ask you. The responding officer, you know, we know it's not his job to take pictures. We know it's not his job to investigate that way. But if there are officers that he's not telling anyone that he saw tire tracks, he's not telling anyone he saw footprints, he's not keeping the other deputies away from the bodies, is that a problem here?
Yeah, it certainly can be, but let's back up just for a second, Ben, because in direct examination, he clearly stated that he assigned somebody to put up crime scene tape. That is part of his job. Remember, they talked about an activity log. That's part of what they do. That's to control the crime scene, to prevent anybody from getting in. And certainly, if that crime scene tape encompassed those tracks, that would prevent anybody from getting to them. Now, one of the problems I do have is if you have deputies that are milling about, not doing a specific job at the scene, they become what are referred to as looky-loos. You'll hear that throughout, you know, crime scene investigation classes and all that sort of stuff. You don't want them approaching the body. Keep in mind, curiosity sometimes gets the best of people. And if this had been a larger population, you know, where you had a lot of cases that are pretty bad, you wouldn't expect deputies to go over and take a look at bodies. I don't know what they did, but when you have a case like this, there's a chance that they could gravitate over there and go poking around. You have to be able to stand and deliver in a court of law and say, okay, this is what I was doing when I was there. My purpose was to protect the scene. My purpose was to identify evidence and pass that on to investigators upon arrival. But yeah, back to Chanley's point, it has a bad appearance here. And so that's one of the things you want to avoid. He was probably doing his job, but you know, the folks on the jury, they don't know that.
Yeah, and Dick Harpootlian has done it many times to many investigators through the years. Joseph Scott Morgan, thanks so much for helping us out, and a big thanks to Matt Harris as well. I know we had a couple technical difficulties, but I'm glad we got you back on. When we come back, more from Chanley Painter as we get a look at some of the things that the cameras inside the courtroom didn't necessarily show you today.
We're located about 45 miles from Charleston, and we are the front porch of the Low Country, which is our slogan. I've heard some people say we were going to put a thing out saying we were the front porch of justice after all of this.
Walter Borough, the front porch of justice, and Court TV, your front row seat to justice. That's the mayor down there in South Carolina, in the Low Country. Let's bring back in Chanley Painter. Chanley, all right. So how has this trial impacted this small town?
Well, for months, the small town of Walterboro, Vinny, around 5,500 people only, have been gearing up. And I spoke to the mayor today, and it's been months of just working with all departments across the city to try to prepare for the onslaught of media, community members, the onlookers. You can see the security marking off this part of the courthouse. They wanted to have a place for media to park, all the satellite trucks, our Court TV shed here right next to the courthouse, and also across the street, the food trucks. That was planned out with the food truck vendors coming into town to make sure that if there's only an hour lunch break, that people have time to eat and enjoy this town. Ultimately, the mayor wanted to make sure that those visitors here had a good experience and left with a good feel about this community. Let's listen to more about how this trial, making national headlines, has put Walterboro on the map.
It is certainly interesting to turn on the national news on all of the outlets and see from Walterboro, South Carolina. It's not something that that I've seen before. Anywhere we go, people want to ask us about the Murdaugh trial and how we're doing, what it's going to mean here. Everybody was kind of excited to see what was going to happen and a little bit apprehensive about the impact that it would have on the town and how we would handle it. But I think that as we've gotten into the trial this week, I think people are at ease, and it's a little bit of excitement that we don't normally have. So.
The mayor is from this part of South Carolina. He's been actually in Walterboro for many, many decades. He knew Alex's father before he passed away. He told me some stories way back when they knew each other 50 years ago. So he knew the Murdaugh name and how shocking it was when all of this happened to the community in 2021. And he hates that Walterboro is known for this, Vinny, but he hopes that this extra effort, making these out-of-towners feel comfortable in the media spotlight, that they can change that to a more positive spotlight on this small town.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, they have one of the most beautiful courthouses that we've covered in all the trials around the country. Speaking of the courthouse, what did you notice inside the courtroom today?
Well, inside the courtroom, my eyes are on the family of Alec Murdaugh, his son Buster, his brother John Marvin, John Marvin's wife. We have Buster's girlfriend, the sister of Alec Murdaugh, so supportive of him and emotional. Her daughter, Alec's niece, they're all sitting behind him today. And it's interesting to see that because there was no rule invoked here. So the witnesses that are on the list, subpoenaed, all the law enforcement officers, the family members, defense witnesses, they can just sit in the courtroom, they can watch this trial. It's unlike really what we usually see here when they can't be in there, but they arrive each day and they also leave each day to an onslaught of media. Let's take a listen to how Buster leaves the courthouse.
What was it like to see you in court today? Buster, what does it feel like to see your dad?
Buster, do you think your dad's guilty?
What they said?
Do you think your dad's guilty or innocent? Anything you'd like to say about your dad? Right here, right here. Right here.
Buster, how do you feel today? What emotions are you going through? Buster, you don't believe any of it? Come here, anything to say about your brother?
The family, they're escorted in and out with a couple of security personnel, and media asked really not to approach them, but he said that they do. Inside the courtroom, you can really tell that John Marvin is almost the leader there for the family, comforting everyone. Vinny.
Yeah, and Buster in a tough spot, right? His brother, his mom shot and killed, his dad on trial. Never easy for the kids involved in all this. Charlie Painter, thanks so much. Don't go anywhere, folks. We got much more ahead from South Carolina. We'll bring in our think tank, get a little legal breakdown of what happened today.
0.
In the low country of South Carolina, day 2 of the Murdaugh family murder trial, and we are live with the latest. As disgraced attorney Alec Murdaugh faces double murder charges for shooting and killing his wife and son. Today, jurors were taken to the scene of the crime, looking at the first responder's body cam and listening to the words of Alec Murdaugh on the night of the murders.
They are dead on that.
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
Plus, we take a closer listen to the 911 call made from the scene of the crimes.
Okay, what is her name?
Maggie and Paul.
Is he moving at all, your son? I know you said that she was shot, but what about your son?
Nobody. They're not. Neither one of them moving.
On the docket tonight in St. Johns County, Florida, young teenager Tristan Bailey went missing. When she was found in her neighborhood, the medical examiner reported 114 stab wounds. Then, more shock when the suspect was arrested, her 14-year-old classmate and neighbor, Aiden Fucci. Tonight, a preview of his upcoming murder trial on Court TV. In tonight's Tank Takes, investigators confiscated a shotgun at the scene of the Murdaugh family murders, but Alec Murdaugh says he grabbed it afterwards. Does that make him look more guilty or more innocent? Get ready. This hour of closing arguments starts right now. I'm Vinny Politan. Thank you so much for joining us here on Closing Arguments. How many times have you heard this phrase? What you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Thousands of times, right? Whether it's a cop show or right here on your front row seat to justice. Well, for Alec Murdaugh, accused of murdering his wife and son, he said a lot, and it's being used against him at his murder trial. And that was a big part of the beginning of testimony for the prosecution. You have a responding officer who's got a body camera on. So he's recording the video and the audio of Alec Murdaugh, who is talking a lot at the scene because he's the one who called 911. He's the one who's telling the officer what's going on here. But he speaks a lot. And today the jury got to see him and hear him. Now, the rest of us only got to hear him because the video has been sealed and should be unsealed. Hopefully, by tomorrow, we may get to see a redacted portion because a lot of the video had the gruesome butchering of Paul and Maggie. And the judge and no one else involved with the case wanted to release that publicly. Understandable. I get it. If we got that footage, we would blur things out and you wouldn't see it. But they want to be very respectful and in the way they're handling this case. So with that in mind, I want you right now to listen to Alec Murdaugh. Again, this is him speaking to the first responding officer.
To let you know, because of the scene, I did go get a gun and bring it down here.
It's in your vehicle? Do you have any guns on you at all?
No, sir. It's leaning up against the side of my car.
Okay. You're fine, man. You're fine. Turn around for me.
I don't have any.
Okay. Yes, sir. I see that. Okay. This is your wife and son? Okay.
It's bad. Check the pulses.
Yes, sir. This is the firearm you brought from inside the house?
Sir, yes, sir. I went and got, this is a long story. My son was in a boat wreck a few months back. He's been getting threats. Most of it's been benign stuff we didn't take serious.
Okay.
He's been getting punched. I know that's what it is.
Did you get home right when you called, or did you go to the house first? Where is the house?
I came to the house first. My mom has late stages Alzheimer's, and my dad is in the hospital.
Okay.
I left. I don't know what time. I can go back on my phone and tell you the exact times. Did you check?
Did I check what?
Did you check them?
We got medical guys that are, that's what they're gonna do, okay?
What are they doing? Can they hurry?
They are, yes, sir. That gentleman that was out here already, he's one of the battalion chiefs, okay? How did you pull up? You from back there?
I went to the house and they weren't home, which was odd. I tried to call.
Okay.
And then I knew they had been down here before I left to go to my mom's.
Okay.
And so that is loaded.
Okay.
You might want to unload it. But I mean,
Is this the only firearm with you? This is the only one, or is there any more in the truck?
I believe that's it.
You think that's the only one? Okay.
I'm 99%.
Do you normally have any other firearms in your vehicle?
I don't, but
Okay.
occasionally there's a pistol in there. They are dead, aren't they?
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
Randy. All the cats. Where are you now? All right. Yeah, the police are here now. The police are here now. That's my brother.
Okay. When was the last time you were here with them? Or talked to them or anything like that?
It was earlier tonight. I don't know the exact time, but
okay.
I left. I was probably gone an hour and a half from my mom's, and I saw them about 45 minutes before that.
Okay.
I rode around with Paul for 2 hours this afternoon in the pickup truck.
That's your son, Paul? Okay.
Somebody going to check him?
Yes, sir. They've already checked them.
They did check him?
Yes, sir.
It's official that they're dead?
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
I'm very sorry. He called her here.
What's her name?
Her name's Maggie Murdaugh. Margaret Brandstetter Murdaugh. How you doing?
What's her birthday? I see quite a few tire tracks in here. Were any of these you going in and out?
No, I came in here and I left one time, then I came back.
Okay.
The rest of them, maybe
Okay.
from earlier, but
Okay.
only 2 are mine.
Did you go out this way at all?
No.
And remember, it's prosecutors who are playing this. Prosecutors want this jury to hear it. Let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Chanley Paint, who's joined us live tonight outside the courthouse in Walterboro, South Carolina, but of course was inside the courtroom during all of this. Let's talk about the first responders. A lot of testimonies from these first responders today. What are your big takeaways?
6 total witnesses called today, and really for the prosecution setting the scene for the jurors, taking them to June 7th, 2021 to the scene, what the officers witnessed, the state of Maggie and Paul visually and both through testimony, and then familiarizing them with the location of where they were on the property, where the bodies are, where the hangar that now is the shed, where the kennels were. And that's what the point of the prosecution's case is, of course, also to shock them with the graphic nature of this crime. But on cross, what stood out to me the most is, and we've talked about this, Vinny, is how Dick Harpootlian was able to try to poke holes in the investigation and what these first responders failed to preserve, what they overlooked possibly, what they did and didn't do, which seemed to resonate in the courtroom. But one thing that was consistent on all of the officers when they were asked is that Alec Murdaugh's demeanor, he was upset, but something seemed a little odd, but they did notice one thing that was missing from his clothes. Let's watch.
No report indicates any blood visible on him. You would agree with that?
I didn't observe any.
What?
I did not observe any.
No blood on Alec Murdaugh's clothes. In fact, no dirt. He consistently told 911 body cam video that he checked the pulses for a pulse of Maggie and Paul, that he had been moving around the property, and yet there was no sign, according to the officer's testimony, that he had any blood on him or anything that would indicate that he would have done that. In fact, one of the officers this afternoon said he would have had something on him if you had bent down and tried to touch or manipulate Paul's body in any way, Vinny.
Now, they also heard more words of Alec Murdaugh today. Him speaking, the 911 call was played for the jury.
It was. This was interesting because we hadn't heard the entire 911 call. First, it went into Hampton County, and then they transferred it over to Colleton County because, again, that Moselle property right on the border there of Colleton and Hampton, and we learned more of the extended conversation, and we can hear Alec Murdaugh walking the 911 dispatcher through what he's doing. He tells her that he is going to go retrieve a shotgun from his home because he feels he's in fear. But one thing that he mentions to everyone that would listen is about a boat crash. Paul's in. Let's watch.
He's been being threatened by my son, Alex, both sex. He's been being threatened for months and months and months. He's been hit several times, and he's just finally it's too many.
So again, he says that Paul's receiving threats, that those threats were reported, and that Paul knew who was threatening him. So again, he's building that right on the 911 call before any officer actually arrives to the property. He says he's not present when this happens. He hadn't seen Paul or Maggie for up to 2 hours before then, is what he says on this 911 call, and that he again confirms that he tried to go check for pulses, Vinny.
So my understanding all along is that we don't have a murder weapon in this case. No murder weapon has been recovered, yet there was a shotgun inside the courtroom today. Please explain that.
Yes, and a very ostentatious show of the shotgun. It was held up by the first witness of the day, and it's a camo shotgun. This was the weapon that Paul Murdaugh on that 911 call said that he was going to go back to the home and he retrieved. And inside the court, the prosecutor opens the box. The Sergeant Green, he holds it up for the jury to see. And what we know about this shotgun is that it was Paul's shotgun. And we learned in opening statements yesterday that when the authorities arrived, of course, he has it with them. They take it from him immediately, right? Defense says, well, that made him look guilty because he has a shotgun and Paul's wounds were from a shotgun, but that wasn't the murder weapon. In fact, this gun was loaded with the wrong ammo. So they say that Alec was so traumatized that when he went to the home to grab the gun, he loaded it with the wrong ammo. And then we also learned, interestingly, from prosecutors' opening, Vinny, that that shotgun had Maggie's DNA on it, and it was Paul's, but we don't know the full story there. So that's to come on why that would be mentioned in opening statement.
Chanley Painter at the courthouse. Long hours today, and they will continue tomorrow. Thank you so much, Chanley. Let's bring in our think tank. Join us tonight in Atlanta, Georgia, criminal defense attorney Eklund Mercy. In Columbia, South Carolina, former South Carolina solicitor who prosecuted the extremely famous Susan Smith case back in 1995 when he was just a teenager. Tommy Pope is with us. And in Phoenix, Arizona, the attorney who represented Jodi Arias and the author of the book series Trapped with Ms. Arias, Kirk Nurmi, back with us. Great to see everyone tonight. Thank you so much. Eklund, let me begin with you. And we hear the words of Alec Murdaugh. Eklund, we hear his words. Are you hearing something that you believe is very helpful for the prosecution? Is he getting his defense case out without testifying? What are you hearing in those words?
What I'm hearing is, like doctors make the worst patients, attorneys actually make the worst clients. I love, there's a whole rule to remain silent instead, and he did not use that.
But if you find your wife and son dead, you're not going to remain silent.
Yes,
you got to call 911.
Absolutely, because you're a human being. But I really think that it actually goes to his defense. I think it helps him. The fact that he showed emotion, he wasn't really coherent. It didn't seem planned. It didn't seem rehearsed. So I think that the prosecutor kind of like shot themselves in the foot with this recording, because it kind of sets the tone for a concerned father, and the fact that there's other suspects because of the boat accident. So we have the boating accident, and if they could make any connection to anybody connected with that accident and what happened there, to anybody who worked and did the investigation, to anybody who is remotely a part of the investigation, the defense got it. I think the defense got it.
Tommy, what are your thoughts? I've seen cases where prosecutors put in these recordings of defendants and they sort of tell their story without being cross-examined, without testifying. Do you think what this jury heard today is going to help prosecutors?
I think the frustration as a prosecutor is it's so slow moving. We heard in opening that there may be casings that are going to match the guns or the ammo that the family uses, which would put the murder weapons back in contact with Alec. But, right now, Alec could be one or two things. He can be an upset man that found his family, or he can be a guy that just killed his family. And you would see a lot of those same type emotions. And is he talking too much? Is he not talking enough? I think until you have the other pieces of evidence, it's going to be hard to tell. And again, as a prosecutor, I was thinking about your folks working down there, how slow and tedious a day was. Any of these folks that have been in the courtroom know it's not near as glamorous as it is on TV. You don't get the confessions, and you have 3 chain witnesses to put one piece of tape. So it's going to be a long, drawn-out process to bring the story together, because if the jury knows that the gun casing's put in there, then suddenly they're looking at him with a different filter of when he's crying and when he's not, and so on and so forth.
Kirk, Nurmi, what do you think? Alec Murdaugh, the jury got to hear him. They got to hear him in a very emotional state. What's your read on all of it?
I think the word that was just used, filter, is a really good one, because, ultimately, if he's not on trial for murder, if there's someone else is on trial, you're going to excuse the lack of crying. You're going to excuse the, how you doing comment. You're going to excuse the volunteering information as a man who's trying to process it, trying to make sense of it, what have you. But because he's on trial, you look at it with suspicion instead of sympathy. So how is the rest of this going to play out really is going to determine the filter that people look at this through.
How about this, Kirk? Let me throw a curveball at you. How about the fact that there's no blood or dirt on him? He's the one discovering his wife and son. It's been described as a butchering. There's blood everywhere, yet he's not bloody. Yet he's not dirty. He wasn't down there with the bodies. Like, does that sound normal? Does that sound like the way someone would respond? How a jury would expect someone to respond?
Well, let me try to hit that curveball over the fence, Vinny, because I think what we're dealing with here is a different type of human being called an attorney. An attorney might know that the crime scene should not be disturbed. So if he checked for pulse, he did so in the minimal way, confirmed that they were dead before he called 911. That's a very reasonable explanation, in my opinion.
Eklund, do you think he was trying to solve this case? I mean, he's giving him leads. He said it was the boat. It was the boat. And then he was talking about, the fact that he was confirming something related to the tire tracks. He was kind of going along with the investigator on that as well.
Well, maybe I'm not the right one to ask, because I IRAC like parking tickets. So because I'm an attorney, so we look at it differently when it involves yourself. So I could only imagine what he's going through, and all of it comes in. I'm thinking like law school, all through your practice of law, you're going through the gambit to try to figure out what to say, what to do. It's easier, like as attorneys, when we're on the outside, we don't know what it feels like. We don't see it from their perspective, and being put in that to actually be in the crime scene, to actually see the corpse and it's not an autopsy picture, it's completely different. So I think that, you know, if he has a human reaction, he has a human reaction.
And we'll see what the jury's reaction is to that reaction, perhaps in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, Think Tank with us the whole hour. When we come back, Chanley mentioned it. We're going to play it for you, the 911 call. Don't go anywhere.
Ma'am, I don't know, but you got blood everywhere. His brain,